The spectrum of consciousness. The spectrum of consciousness is Wilbur's model of human growth and development, integrating the systems developed by psychology with those of the contemplative traditions. The overall spectrum can be divided in various ways. In the Atman project, for example, Wilbur gives 17 basic levels or structures which make up the realms of matter, body, mind, soul, and spirit. These enduring structures of consciousness are what make up the great hierarchy, chain, nest of being. For the purpose of summary, he has distilled the spectrum into 7 or 9 general ones, and further distilled into 3 major realms of development. The following 2 sections offer 2 different ways of subdividing the stages of development and simple explanations of them. See also the integral approach and completing the great chain. To study Wilbur's model in depth, see the annotated bibliography at the end of the book. 7 stages and 3 realms. 1. Archaic. This includes the material body, sensations, perceptions, and emotions. This is roughly equivalent to Jean Piaget's sensory-motor intelligence. Abraham Maslow's physiological needs, Jane Levinger's autistic and symbiotic stages, the first and second chakras, the Annamaya Kosha, physical food, and the Pranamaya Kosha, Elan vital. 2. Magic. This includes simple images, symbols, and the first rudimentary concepts, or the first and lowest mental productions, which are magical in the sense that they display condensation, displacement, omnipotence of thought, and so on. This is Freud's primary process. R.A.Charles' paleologic. Piaget's pre-operational thinking. The third chakra. It is correlated with Lawrence Kohlberg's pre-conventional morality, Lovinger's impulsive and self-protective stages, Maslow's safety needs, and so on. 3. Mythic. This stage is more advanced than magic, but not yet capable of clear rationality or hypothetico-deductive reasoning. A stage Jean Gebser explicitly termed mythic. This is essentially Piaget's concrete operational thinking, the 4th chakra. The beginning of Mano Mayakosha, Vendata, and Meno Vinajiana, Mahayana. It is correlated with Lovinger's conformist and conscientious conformist stages, Maslow's belongingness needs, Kohlberg's conventional stages, and so on. 4. Rational. This is Piaget's formal operational thinking, proportional or hypothetical deductive reasoning, the 5th chakra, the culmination of Mano Mayakosha and Mayo Vijnana. It is correlated with Lovinger's conscientious and individualistic stages, Kohlberg's post-conventional morality, Maslow's self-esteem needs, and so on. 5. Psychic. Here I am including the centaur and the low, subtle as the one general level. Psychic does not necessarily mean paranormal, although some texts suggest that certain paranormal events may more likely occur here. Rather, it refers to psyche as a higher level of development than the mind per se. Aurobindo Free John, in other words. Its cognitive structure has been called vision logic or integrative logic, the sixth chakra, the beginning of Manas, Mahayana, and Vijnana, Mahakosha, Vedanta. It is correlated with Lovinger's integrated and autonomous stages, Maslow's self-actuation needs, James Brogton's integrated stage, and so on. 6. Subtle. This is basically the archetypal level, the level of the illuminated mind. Aurobindo. The culmination of Manas, Vijnanmayakosha, a truly transrational, not pre-rational, and not anti-rational structure. Intuition in its highest and most sober sense, not emotionalism or merely bodily felt meaning. Home of Platonic forms, Biha mantra, Vasanas, beginning of the seventh chakra, and sub-chakras, start of Maslow's self-transcendence needs, and so on. Casual, or the unmanifest ground of suchness of all levels, the limit of growth and development, spirits in the highest sense, not as a big person, but as the ground of being, tillage. Eternal substance, Spinoza. Geist, Hegel. At and beyond the seventh chakra, Dhyana Dhammaya Kosha, Vedanta, Alaya Vijnana, Mahayana, Keter, Kabbalah, and so on. Those 7 general structure stages of development can be further reduced to 3 general realms: the pre-rational subconscious, the rational self-conscious, and the trans-rational superconscious. See Figure 1. Figure 1. 9 basic structures, pathologies, and treatments. Growth and development occur through a series of stages or levels, from the least developed and least integrated to the most developed and most integrated. There are probably dozens of different levels and types of levels of growths. I have selected 9 of the most important. They are listed in column 1 of Figure 2, Basic Structures of Consciousness. Figure 2, Correlation of Structures, Fulcrums, Psychopathologies, and Treatments. Reprinted from Grace and Grit, page 184. Now, as the self develops at each stage, things can go either relatively well or relatively poorly. If things go well, the self develops normally and moves on to the next stage in a relatively well-functioning way. But if things go persistently badly at a given stage, then various pathologies can develop. And the type of pathology, the type of neurosis, depends precisely on the stage or level at which the problem occurs. In other words, at each stage or level of development, the self is faced with certain tasks. How it negotiates those tasks determines whether it winds up relatively healthy or relatively disturbed. First and foremost, at each stage of development, the self starts out identified with that stage, and it must accomplish the task appropriate to that stage, whether learning, toilet training, or learning language. But in order for development to continue, the self has to let go of that stage, or disidentify with it, in order to make room for the new and higher stage. In other words, it has to differentiate from the lower stage, identify with the higher stage, and then integrate the higher with the lower. This task of differentiation and then integration is called a fulcrum. It just means a major turning point or a major step in development. So in column 2 of figure 2, labeled corresponding fulcrums, we have the 9 major fulcrums or turning points that correspond to the 9 major levels or stages of consciousness development. If anything goes persistently wrong at a given fulcrum, then you get a specific and characteristic pathology. These 9 major pathologies are listed in column 3, characteristic pathologies. Here you find things like psychoses, neuroses, existential crises, and so on. Finally, different treatment methods have evolved over the years to treat these various pathologies, and I've listed those treatments in column 4, treatment modalities. The treatment that I think have been demonstrated to be the best or more appropriate for each particular problem. And this is exactly where the relation or psychotherapy and medication comes in. The basic structures are the fundamental building blocks of awareness, things like sensations, images, impulses, concepts, and so on. I have listed 9 major structures, which are just an expanded version of what is known in the perennial philosophy as the great chain of being: matter, body, mind, soul, and spirit. In ascending order, the 9 levels are: 1. The sensory physical structures. The world view of this level is called archaic. These include the material components of the body plus sensation and perception. This is what Piaget called sensory-motor intelligence, what Aurobindo called the physical sensory, what Vedanta calls the Annamaya Kosha, and so on. 2. The phantasmic, emotional, the beginning of the magical worldview. This is the emotional, sexual level. The levels of impulse, of libido, elan, vital, bioenergy, prana, plus the level of images, the first mental forms, images, what Silvano Areti calls phantasmic level, start to emerge in the infant around 7 months or so. 3. The representational mind, or rep mind for short, the transition from magical to mythic, what Piaget called the pre-operational thinking. It consists of symbols which emerge between the ages of 2 and 4 years and then concepts, which emerge between the ages of 4 and 7. What is the difference between images, symbols, and concepts? An image represents a thing by looking like that thing. It's fairly simple. The image of a tree, for example, looks more or less like a real tree. A symbol represents a thing but doesn't look like that thing, which is a much harder and higher task. For example, the word Fido represents your dog, but it doesn't look like the real dog at all, and so it's harder to hold in mind. That's why words emerge only after images. Finally, a concept represents a class of things. The concept of dog means all possible dogs, not just Fido. A harder task still. A symbol denotes, a concept connotes. But symbols and concepts together we refer to as the pre-operational or representational mind. Level 4. The role mind. The mythic worldview develops between the ages of 7 and 11 or so, what Piaget called concrete operational thinking. The Buddhists call it the mana vajnana, the mind concretely operating on sensory experience. I call it role, because it is the first structure that can perform rule-dominated thinking, like multiplication or division. And it is the first structure that can take the role of other, or actually assume a perspective different from its own. It's a very important structure. Piaget calls it concrete operational because, although it can perform complex operations, it does so in a very concrete and literal way. This is the structure, for example, that thinks that myths are concretely true, literally true. Level 5, which I call formal reflective. The rational worldview is the first structure that can not only think, but think about thinking. It is thus highly introspective, and it is capable of hypothetical reasoning or testing propositions against evidence. What Piaget called formal operational thinking. It typically emerges in adolescence and is responsible for the burgeoning self-consciousness and wild idealism of that period. Aurobindo refers to this as the reasoning mind. Vedanta calls it the Manamaya Kosha. Level 6 is existential, or vision logic, a logic which is not divisive, but inclusive, integrating, networking, joining, what Aurobindo called the higher mind. In Buddhism, the manas. It is a very integrative structure. Particularly, it is capable of integrating the mind and body into a higher order union, which I call the centaur, symbolizing mind-body union, not identity. Level 7 is called psychic, which doesn't mean psychic capacities per se, although these might begin to develop here, but basically it just means the beginning stages of transpersonal, spiritual, or contemplative development, what Aurobindo called the illumined mind. Level 8 is called the subtle, or the intermediate stage of spiritual development, the home of various luminous forms, divine forms, or deity forms, known as Yadam in Buddhism, or Ishtavedeva in Hinduism, not to be confused with the collective mythic forms of levels 3 and 4, the home of a personal god, the home of the real transpersonal archetypes and supra-individual forms. Aurobindo's intuitive mind. Vijnana kosha in Vedanta. In Buddhism, the Alaya Vijnana. Level 9 is the casual, or the pure, unmanifest source of all the other and lower levels. The home not of a personal God, but of a formless Godhead or abyss. Aurobindo's overmind. In Vedanta, the Anadama Yakosha, the bliss body. Finally, the paper on which the entire diagram is drawn represents ultimate reality, or absolute spirit, which is not a level among other levels but the ground and reality of all levels. Aurobindo's supermind. In Buddhism, the pure alaya. In Vedanta, turiya. So level 1 is matter, level 2, body, levels 3, 4, and 5 are mind, and level 6 is an integration of the mind and body, what I call the centaur. Level 7 and 8 are soul, and level 9 plus the paper are spirit.